and the army goes rolling along.
Today is May 13th, 2022. I'm John Graves at the Warhawk Air Museum in Nampa, Idaho. I'll be interviewing Chuck McGee for our Veterans History Project, partnership with Library of Congress. Cameraman is Don Sharon. Welcome to you, Chuck.
Thank you very much, John. Pleasure to be here.
If you give us your full name and date of birth.
My name is Charles Duncan McGee. I was born December 31st, 1945 in Newport, Monmouthshire, Great Britain. I served in the Army, in the Army Reserve and the Army Guard, the Alaska National Guard. My highest rank attained was Major. I was in Vietnam and served in a conflict area at the time in Cambodia, or in Colombia.
Colombia.
Yeah. As a reservist in the Guard. So,
Chuck, we appreciate you coming in to do these interviews. It's an important thing that we're trying to do to get all of the veterans that we can recorded for family, for posterity. The Library of Congress has started us on this, and we're rolling with it. It's just a great thing.
well, thank you, John. I appreciate the opportunity to do this. It's for the same reason that you mentioned you're doing it. I can certainly take advantage of that and pass this on to my family. It will be excellent for them.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we're going to start with where you were born.
I was born in Newport, Monmouthshire, Great Britain, following just right at the end of the war, December 31st of 45. Lived there for a short period of time, and as soon as things settled down in Europe, we moved to Berlin, where my father was involved in auditing the Reich Bank. They were trying to figure out where all the money went following the fall of the Third Reich.
That must have been pretty destroyed when you got there.
We lived at 33 Uncle Tom Strasse in Berlin, and my parents talk about the time that we lived there, and one of the things that they mentioned was the house that was next door had been bombed, or it was bombed out, and there was a distinct odor coming, and they found that when they began to clean up the remains of the building, that there had been people in the building. So, and other than that, I don't remember a lot about that time, but I did fly into and out of Berlin during the Berlin airlift as a baby in my mother's arms.
Okay. Yes. So, at that point, you were still living there, but you've flown in and out.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And how old were you when you left Berlin?
I was probably 3, maybe 4. We moved from there to Frankfurt, and we spent a little bit of time in Frankfurt, and then moved to the States. During that period of time, perhaps between Berlin and Frankfurt, we did come back to the States to visit family members, and then went back.
So your parents were from England? Is that why you were born there?
No, my parents are American, and they were there during the war.
Okay.
And actually, my mother was born in England. Then we moved back to the States, and I moved back to Washington, D.C., and spent a little bit of time in Washington, and then to Birmingham, Alabama. And I can remember when I first started first grade at Mountain Brook Elementary, my teacher, Mrs. Jones, used to call me Little Churchill because I had an English accent. Just a couple of years later, another recording was made when I was in Boy Scouts, and I had the most southern accent I think I've ever heard.
Pick up languages quickly, do you?
I pick up accents.
Accents, not languages. Understand that, yes. Southern accents are hard not to pick up. So did you have brothers and sisters there?
I did. I have one. Well, he's 6 years younger. I have a brother, Kenley Haddon McGee, and he was born while we were in Birmingham. We've lived in Birmingham for probably 4 years, and then moved to Huntsville, Alabama, where my father was working out at Redstone Arsenal.
So now you're about 10 years old,
Yeah,
somewhere in that
and
area.
right, and
He's working at the Arsenal.
right, yeah, and I can remember we lived on Whitesburg Drive, 10 miles from the Arsenal, and they were testing rocket motors, and you could feel the vibration, and people complained about broken windows from the vibrations. Yeah, so.
And how long did you live there then? This is Huntsville.
Yeah, we lived in Huntsville through probably moved from Huntsville to Cincinnati and Ohio, and I think probably when I was in the 4th grade, and then I finished up at grade school and started junior high in Cincinnati, and we lived there for 2.5, 3 years, and moved from there back to Washington area, Arlington, Virginia, and I started school there, and we were there for a couple of years, and then moved back to Birmingham, and from there to Paris, France, and I went to Paris American High School there for 3.5 years, and came back to the States my first day in my new school in Huntsville, which was Huntsville High. It was the day that John F. Kennedy was shot, and I'll never forget that day, as probably most of us our age wouldn't.
Most of them don't,
Yeah.
So was your dad in the military or a government worker that he was in Washington? And
Well, no, he was working for the government then, for different agencies, and during the war, he was with the Red Cross, and was actually assigned to military units as they moved from England across the Channel into France and Germany.
followed right behind the troops.
Yeah,
The action.
with some, yeah. Mm-hmm. So
So did he have stories to tell you?
he didn't talk about it very much, and I think I can understand that.
Yes.
It's just probably hard to talk to people that don't understand what you're talking about.
I guess that's part of it, yes.
So
So after high school, you went on to further school, or?
well, yeah, I did. I did a year at Athens College, which is now Athens University. It's part of the Alabama university system, and I joined a fraternity we were in the process of going teak, and I enjoyed the fraternity perhaps too much, and my grade point average put me at a point that I was eligible for the draft, so I decided to beat the draft and joined. I figured I could do what I wanted to do rather than what they wanted me to do.
No matter what the recruiter says, it's
Right.
still better.
Yeah. So I went through an induction station in Montgomery, Alabama, and then went to basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia. From there, we went to Fort Lewis, Washington for leadership preparatory training, and they made us acting sergeants in advanced training then. So then I went through AIT at Fort Lewis.
And what time of year were these, your basic training in the southeast, wasn't that?
Yeah, I went on active duty on 2 September of '66. So
A little humid there, and then you go to Washington
yeah,
in October.
and that must have been maybe end of October, 1st of November.
A little weather change there.
Yeah, Washington was all rain. And going through infantry AIT in Washington, you got used to wearing wet weather gear.
I'm sure, yes. Yes.
Oh.
So
And-
then you went to other schools then, and.
Well, from there, I went into a holding company because I had qualified for OCS and had applied, and ended up going to Fort Benning infantry for infantry officer training, officer course. And from there, I was assigned back at Fort Lewis at the Personnel Center. I was a assistant company commander at for a headquarters company for the United States Army Personnel Center, which sent everybody to Vietnam, Korea, stations in the Pacific, and then brought them back. So they processed through the center, and we provided housing for them and meals, and all that sort of thing.
Transportation.
Yeah. And I was there until I went to flight school, because during OCS I had qualified for flight school, and went to flight school at Fort Walters, Texas. And I did visit Fort Walters just a few years ago, and of course Fort Walters is not military anymore, but the airfields are still there, and even the Howard Johnson, or the Howard, or the Holiday Inn, that after we soloed, everybody got thrown in the pool at the Holiday Inn. They still had the helicopter rotor blades over the point where you go into the pool at the Holiday Inn.
So throwing you in the pool is better than tearing off your shirt and writing on it.
Yeah, oh yes. The shirt or the clothes you were wearing were Army issue, so they belonged to the Uncle Sam.
Yes, yes. So then now you're a helicopter pilot.
Yeah, on my way to Vietnam, and I was flew into Cam Bay, and from Cam Bay went to base just outside of Saigon for the 101st induction training that they do there, in-country training. And boy, the big thing there was my first experience with a B-52 strike, just not far from everything shook, and I had no idea what it was, but I learned quickly.
Awesome. Yeah.
And I figured out why the bunkers were just outside the door of the tents we were sleeping in.
A safe place, in case they missed by a little, you mean?
Oh, right. And there must have been a reason that they were bombing so close, so I figured if they were bombing, those people they were bombing could be throwing stuff on us as well.
Mortar range, huh?
Yeah. So I went from there to I Corps, and spent my tour initially with the 101st, with the 158th Aviation Battalion. Initially, I was assigned to an aviation company, B Company, and I was the first replacement to join the company. First new in-country replacement after they had arrived in Vietnam. So, and that was, they had arrived in, it must have been the end of 68, and I joined them, 69, and I joined them just shortly after they arrived in country. And during that period of time, I spent 6 months with B Company, and during that period of time, we lost, I think it was 12 or 13 of our original 24 helicopters, mostly due to pilot error. And
All Hueys?
Yeah, all Hueys. And they were H models then. The H models they'd come over with the H models. They were the first to get the H models when they were issued. And during that period of time, most of the operations we were involved in were in the Ashaw Valley. Hamburger Hill happened then. And a couple of things that I remember that are sort of unique about that operation. We were actually in the valley where probably 80% of the aviation assets of the 101st were staging out of a large field in the Ashaw that was not on a fire base at all. It was just in an open area. Yeah, and so there were hundreds of helicopters there, and we were all waiting. And meanwhile, you could see the area where Hamburger Hill was, and there were B-52 strikes on Hamburger Hill, and they just pulverized the mountain. I don't know how anybody could have lived through that. But we had 6 LZs that we went into that were part of the operation, not my company, but all of them. The first aircraft that went into each of those LZs were shot down. And so then it was a matter of getting people in there to support them.
So these are
That-
carrying about 12
Yeah.
troops.
Yeah. Well, you know, following the B-52 strikes, then the artillery started going in. And then I guess before the artillery, the fast movers pulverized the LZs. And then artillery. And then flying in, we had the gunships that were in front of us firing up the LZs. And it was just incredible that people were to actually live through that.
And yet they were shooting back.
Incredible. And a couple of things that I remember about Forts Hill, or about Hamburger Hill, was I can remember at one point going into an LZ to pick up people, and we picked up people. We'd pick up KIAs also. But going down, hovering down through the trees, and the crew chief and gunner hanging out on either side, telling you tail to the left, tail to the right, and coming down, guiding you down so you get down.
Tight quarters.
Yeah, very tight. At least they seemed to be then for me.
Knowing that those blades are way out there.
Yeah, yeah. And at one point, I can remember going into an LZ and we were picking up an NBC reporter that was on the ground. He was walking towards the aircraft. I didn't see this, but my gunner said, "Look out! An RPG just went underneath the rotor blades between the aircraft and the rotor blades." So, and yeah, an RPG is a rocket-propelled grenade shot from the end of a rifle. Yeah. So, and during that period of time, made some close friends. Stayed in contact with some. From there, I went to battalion as the battalion